With us here on Morning at NTV, we are now into our Kickstarter discussion where we shall be looking at the threat to Nalubale and Kiira dams. Of course, this is on the backdrop of the fact that apparent flaws are threatening the feasibility of the two facilities. Just a preamble before I introduce my guest who will be helping us understand what is happening and also make our way around the energy sector with regard to these two landmark facilities in the country. The government will urgently require to invest at least $10 million, that's a staggering 37 billion Uganda shillings or more, to fix multiple defects at the Nalubale and Kiira hydropower stations on River Nile in Jinja, days after taking over the infrastructure from the concessionaire Eskom Ltd, according to reports. UEGCL received Nalubale and Kiira dams last week after Eskom's 20-year concession to run them since November 6, 2002, I must say, elapsed. And in the studio this morning is a gentleman who is going to help us understand what is at play. Some of these aspects, especially in the energy sector, can be daunting even for your average Chris Higenyi. Engineer Emmanuel Nsubuga, the Principal Energy Officer, Electrical Generation at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development. Many thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning, Chris.
How are you doing?
I'm okay, and good morning to our viewers.
Good. Before we came on air, we were having a conversation about engineering, and the good gentleman, Engineer Nsubuga, suggested that I should enroll for engineering. I was like, no, let me stick to broadcasting. Why was he saying that? He's a Bachelor of Science Honours degree holder. He also holds a postgraduate diploma in engineering in Sweden, and also a Masters of Science in engineering from the UK. No one can better explain these things before we get underway. All right, let me leave it to you. What is the state of affairs at Nalubale and Kiira hydropower stations in Jinja?
Thank you, Chris, and good morning again to our viewers. First and foremost, let me put into perspective the history of Kiira Nalubale, because whatever I'm going to explain about the Eskom complex in what we used to call it, now it's the UEGCL complex in Jinja, you need to understand it from the history of the power plants. So the oldest of them, the former Owen Falls Dam, now Nalubale, has 10 units which were commissioned between 1954 and 1968. The last unit coming on board in 1968. Yeah. These were done by, of course, the late Queen Elizabeth and her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, where, by the way, I did my Masters of Science. Okay. And then eventually, between 2000 and 2007, government diverted some of the water to produce additional power under the Kiira or Kiira power station, which are the additional 5 units of 40 megawatts each. So the original are 18 megawatts, which is 180, and the other ones are 150, rather 5, and each of them is 40, which is the 200 megawatts. Now, the age of Nalubale itself, given that it was commissioned in 1954, and given the circumstances then and the changes that have occurred, have resulted to what we call concrete cancer, which is the biggest problem that our oldest power station suffers, and that is the alkali silicate reaction. It's commonly concrete cancer. Cement is largely alkaline in nature, meaning basic chemistry, it has pH above 7, and aggregate, which is the other mixtures, stones that you add to that, have silicate in them, and these tend to react, creating some form of calcium alkali silicate gel, and that gel has high affinity for water, so it absorbs water. And over the years it deteriorates the concrete. So it's true that the concrete in Nalubale has deteriorated over years, but it is a power station, Chris. If I went into the detail of all the engineering aspects, you'll need 4 years.
Of course, no doubt about that.
So yes, it is true that government has taken over this power plant, because that's a policy decision, but government must also now be able to maintain and keep this power plant running, because this power plant is very vital to our power system.
That's right.
Yes.
All right. Now, when you speak about the complexities around the power plant and perhaps the dynamics under which we find ourselves in this situation, could be a discussion for an entire week, perhaps, especially in broadcasting terms. But let me just stick on the context of the threats that we now face in light of what has been described rather as flaws. Where do we stand right now? Because should the decommissioning, so to speak, begin because of the flaws? Are things that bad? Because
No.
the average Ugandan will be concerned. What are these flaws, and how does it relate to the ability to maintain power supply and generation?
Now, Chris, the average Ugandan should not be worried, because these are engineering complexes, challenges that we know how to deal with. They are not the first of the kind.
Yeah.
Now, what we see, first of all, you must know that government in concessioning out the power stations to Eskom Uganda Ltd, signed a concession and assignment agreement with them. In that concession and assignment agreement, there were requirements that Eskom was supposed to run this power plant according to prudent utility standards or requirements, which Eskom largely has done. But also government, while monitoring and supervising the works of Eskom, had the responsibility, together with Eskom, of assigning an independent engineer to produce a report on the performance of a power plant. So we have these reports and even the addenda to these reports. Okay. And in these reports, there are solutions that have been proposed to the challenges that have been observed. But we decided to take back the power plant. Okay. It was under our supervision for 20 years. And we said at the end of the 20 years, as a policy directive, we have to take it back, and we have taken it back. But every power plant in this country has some sort of challenge. Okay. When you're running your
including the ones that are simply just been rolled out.
The simplest analogy is your car. You buy it brand new, you put it on the road, but you keep going to service.
That's right.
Sometimes a bolt jumps out. Sometimes you have some challenges with some parts getting loose. So power plants are similar. They have running parts, and anything that has a running part will wear out, including this challenge of concrete that I've explained earlier. So those must constantly be maintained. Now that government has taken over this power plant, it is now the responsibility of government to provide funding to maintain
and now let's stick there on the fact that government has taken over responsibility. It is assumed by the time Eskom was given the concession for the 20 years, government was unable to do the job effectively. Now that it's back into the business of managing it, does the inability by government to manage effectively disappear all of a sudden?
No, you see, government inabilities then largely around financing, capacity. A lot of things have changed. The truth is that over the years, government has developed capacity to be able to run. The Uganda Electricity Generation Company Limited, which is now the one responsible for the Nalubale Kiira Power Complex.
That's right.
The Namamve Thermal Power Plant, the Isimba Power Plant, and eventually when the Karuma Power Plant is commissioned, they'll be the ones to operate and maintain, have developed capacity, which we did not have then. But even within the concession agreements with Eskom, we had to build local capacity. Now what we have done is whoever was working at Nalubaale and Kiira who was under Eskom has been absorbed. Over 90% of the staff that were there have been taken. So it's a continuation. It's a change at the top in terms of who now is the boss, but really the workers are the same.
Workers
are the same. And therefore, I think over the 20 years we've built capacity, and we are able to run these power plants ourselves.
All right. So what does that mean for our ability to generate more power, especially within the context when there is, just the other day, we were having a conversation here about the fact that government is looking to go nuclear because apparently the hydro electric power cannot hold us for for as long as we want. And now there is a concession or somebody going out who we thought, being a private actor, would manage things better. Does that mean those plans for nuclear adaptation are pretty in high gear?
Yes, nuclear is a very good technology in terms of providing what we call base load for the power system.
Base load?
Base load would mean that you have some demand for power that never changes. It is constant. Then you have that changes. Like now you are not at home, you're not ironing, you're not probably using your computer
TV
at home. So that has changed. But there's a certain level of power demand that is constant. That has to be, that constantly exists. Then on top of it, you have the varying one. Now, nuclear will be very, very stable. It's a very stable supply. It is clean. And it is safe, even though people will argue that it is not, but that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah.
But yes, we need to develop a dynamic generation mix, which is not purely dependent on one technology, because each technology has its own challenges.
That's right.
And as you're aware that our country was plunged into a blackout when the lake levels went low. So hydro is our natural resource here. We have a lot of it, but all of it cannot meet our future energy demands. And for that reason, we will develop additional technologies, including nuclear. And the President has been very strong on this one. And there's a department specifically at the Ministry of Energy that is studying and preparing for the development of nuclear, working with international organizations.
All right. The latest development, the departure of Eskom, comes on the backdrop of Umeme's own concession wearing out, and we do not know. We haven't been told quite comprehensively what the next plan is. Is the energy sector undergoing change that perhaps the average journalist and Ugandan is still unable to get wind of?
Yes, the energy change, the energy sector is undergoing a reform. We call it the second generation power sector reform. The first generation power sector reform happened in the late 90s when we unbundled UEB. Brought in the concessions that have now been taken back to government after their natural end.
That's right.
So right now we are going through a second generation power change in which those concessions that have expired are returning back to government. Government is rationalizing its structure of how it's managing the power sector. Government is enacting new laws. Government is pushing in new policies so that we can have a better regulated sector, but also a more effective sector.
Okay.
Yes.
And how does that play into reduction, which is very much needed for industrial power tariffs and also the commercial tariffs?
Yeah, so regulatory reforms are part of it, and the regulator sets tariff, and the government, and through the president again, the focus has been to lower the tariff.
Yeah.
Now you lower tariff by making sure that all elements that contribute to the tariff are low. That means cheap generation of power, transmission of power is also done at low losses, distribution of power is also done at low losses, and maybe you make it also attractive for people to use the power by going to the end users. So for industry, we have introduced something called time of use tariff. Time of use tariff means that at different levels of the day, the tariff for power consumption is different.
They vary.
So in the off-peak hours when you and I are deeper sleep, journalists, most times maybe you don't sleep.
We rarely sleep.
Yeah. But when the engineers are sleeping,
yeah,
the industries could be encouraged to work during that time because there's power available, but no one is using it. And so we make it cheaper at that level to also move that demand, for power, but also encourage it to be used.
That's right.
But now also we have introduced something called the reducing block of tariff, that if the industrial performers can show consistency in consuming power above a certain demand and consistently do so, and also show interest in increasing their consumption by expanding their production, then we encourage them by reducing the tariff, so that industrialization is encouraged. But also on our side as domestic users, we have the cooking tariff, for example, where if you consume above 80 units to 150, we lower it by half to encourage you to consume more. So once you get to 80 units and you have consistently shown that you can get to that point, beyond 80 units to 150 units, your tariff is halved to encourage you to consume more electricity, which you can use for cooking, among other things. Yeah. So these are some of the programs that government is doing to lower the tariff, including, of course, connections and providing access.
Let's just stay on the context of industrial consumption of power. Yes. You speak there of the fact that those that are using it can be able to show consistent use.
Yes.
That is down to industrial appetite for power.
Yes.
And within the last 5 years, industrialists in the country have been very concerned about the fact that power supply seems to be intermittent. and that alone affects their ability to be consistent in order to define the kind of rollout, especially for transmission that you're talking about. Should it be a case of consumers being seen as good actors, or it's a case of government ensuring that the supply alone is there to be a trigger for them to consume?
So it's a multi-pronged approach in terms of solution. One, government must generate stable, reliable power.
That's right.
And that's why you see the Karumas, the Isimbas are being brought on board. They're bigger, they're more consistent than the smaller hydros which are more susceptible to hydrological fluctuations.
That's right.
Now, once you have that reliable supply, then you must be able to transmit it reliably at the quality that it is to be able to deliver it to the industries. And therefore, you need a backbone of transmission lines around the country. High voltage. Forget about the low voltage wooden pole thing. I'm talking about the pylons. Because those have lower losses and therefore will be able to do the service that we require. And then you come to the distribution. So, industrial parks, putting industries within parks makes it easier to deliver reliable power to them than if you have them scattered among other things.
Okay.
And I think this is the whole idea. We then put them in parks so you can be able to deliver all these other utilities to them and make it much reliable. So yes, it is true that we need to improve the reliability of power.
Yeah.
And that is investing in our distribution network such that we do not have rotting poles falling and disrupting power supply. We do not have leaking transformers that fail often, because industries need consistent power supply to be able to reduce cost of production and be able to give good output. And we have programs that are working towards this.
Do those programs involve, are they being constructed or rolled out in consultation with environmentalists? Because Umeme alone and the other companies that are within the mix of generation, transmission and distribution, by using poles, that means our trees are being cut at a rate that is greater than the gospel is being put out by NEMA and government. So you cannot actually preach the gospel while you are the destroyer yourself.
Yes, I know you've just had a discussion about the environment and littering. First and foremost, trees can be regrown. When I was going to school, we were told, cut one tree, plant two.
Plant two.
And I think that should still be preached and practiced.
That's right.
Now, two, we have moved from poles that are wooden to concrete poles. And if you travel across the country, you may be able now to see that we are also adopting the concrete poles among others. But a wooden poles is also a business for our local people. Taking it away from them is almost saying, oh, don't do anything. What we would encourage is sustainability.
No, is there a plan for a transition? Because we need to be able to phase out the wooden pole so that we are sure that in our effort to fight against deforestation, the government, especially Minister of Energy and all the electricity players, are not part of the...
Chris, there's a movement towards having a mixture of wooden and concrete. Why am I saying this? Because you don't walk and find a wild forest and you cut a tree and say, I'm going to make a pole for electricity out of it. These are controlled of certain standards. So these people are accredited foresters.
Accredited for doing exactly that.
Yes.
Okay. As we enter the final bend of this discussion, I know, being a technical guy and me being the average journalist, simply being the conduit between you and the audience to understand some of the things, what is the way forward right now in terms of management? Of course, we know it's back in government hands and we can expect that more improvements continue. Of course, fears are there. What are the safeguards?
First and foremost, I would like to assure the public that we build dams bearing in mind the time for which they will last. Normally, the concrete life would be about 100 years. Our independent our independent engineers have given Nalubale 30 more years, and they have given Kiira 50 more years in terms of their reports, if you look into them, which is consistent with the 100 years, because Nalubale is almost 1954 is about now 70 years,
should be hitting
and 30 more, and then the other one's about 2007, and so it still has some time. That's one. For the electrical mechanicals, there's the high-speed moving parts and the low-speed moving parts, about 40 years, but they're replaceable. You can always remove a breaker and return another one. So be confident that this is thought about at the very start. and be confident that this power plant has survived 70 years. So yes, do we have to do certain things there? Yes, we need to go in there and cure this alkyl silicate reaction and all the other things, and replace, maybe fix this and that. But we have taken this power plant back, so we cannot continue to say, you know, who did a good job, who did a bad job. We monitored and supervised the operation of this power plant. We need to invest money to maintain this power plant on grid as government, and therefore government has a responsibility to identify the need through the regulator to invest in this power plant, and UEGCL is capable. They're already managing Isimba. They are managing Nalubaale thermal power plant. We should be very confident that they should be able to manage the complex in Jinja. Okay,
I'm sure within our audience out there, there are people who are looking for jobs, especially the young turks, and they are looking at the energy sector as one that is, well, a wide area that should be able to employ many of them who are grappling with what is no doubt a hard economy. Speak to them and tell them where the jobs are and how they can be able to approach. Is it the ministry? Of course, I know the public service tendering process, rollout of adverts and stuff like that. The average youth out there is not going to be reading the newspaper because the Minister of Energy has released a list of jobs available. There must be a way that connects directly to them.
Are you talking about in the power sector?
Within the energy sector.
All right, in the energy sector. So there are a lot of jobs within the energy sector. The energy sector is much wider than the power sector, Chris.
Ah, sure.
Yes, the power sector is the lighting, the electricity, and power. The energy sector is charcoal, firewood, you know, power.
Okay. Thank you very much for that enlightenment. Now, let's stick it to the sector where you are.
I am in the energy sector, focused on the power. So yes, for engineers, we have available resources in terms of you can work for any of the utilities, private or public, that are either generating, transmitting, or distributing power, or doing energy service companies as well. Even if you are working on energy efficiency, there are opportunities there. But you can't do all that, power sector without human resource, without procurement, without mass communication, and all that. So these are all opportunities in the energy sector, and I think it's a multi-pronged sector.
I'm glad to hear mass communication. Like the average Ugandan, especially my cobbler, says, Nange kanetege. All right, thank you very much, Engineer Emmanuel Nsubuga, a Principal Energy Officer at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development in charge of electrical generation. That's it for this discussion. I hope you have been emboldened in terms of information and perspective you need to understand. By and large, everything is okay. Please do not be afraid when they say the dams are flawed. We'll be right back.